stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. And, and I think we have a responsibility, you and I and others, in the movement today of a certain age, that we make sure that our shoulders are available for others to climb on and to succeed and to put themselves out there. I think, because that's how it happens. I mean, it started that way, gosh, going back to the Compton cafeteria riots, for crying out loud, in San Francisco in 66 or 67. I always get the dates mixed up, but that's my point. It's already, the kind of the groundswell has already kind of been building and moving from generation to generation. I mean, I can say that, just I stand on the shoulders of, even going back further, people like Sylvia Rivera and people like Marsha P. Johnson, going back to the Stonewall era. Yeah, I was 11 then, and don't do the math. But I would, so I was not out yet. But in the work that I do, I stand on the shoulders of the platform that they started to create back in 1969, and who knows before that. So it's all about that. But it's interesting, Shane. I've seen some data, and I can't quote it specifically, and I apologize for that, but it's out there on the web, where these younger generations of trans and non-binary people and are, while you would think they would be emboldened to stand up and be for them and be themselves in, for example, a interview situation at a company like a Fortune 500 sort of company, that actually the data suggests that they are hesitant. There's a reticence there for them to reveal their true selves to the company, because they believe that the company isn't hip to the vibe, isn't on board. And when I first saw that, I was like, wow, really? I mean, because we've come so far, or so I thought, and we have in certain, on certain dimensions, of course we have. But that tells me that more work is to be done, and more education needs to happen. Because one of the things I was always, and part of my mantra, and I talk about it in the book, is this whole moving from policy to practice. That was, believe it or not, that was going to be the original title of the book before it turned into like a memoir and what it is today. Because I've been very closely involved with the Corporate Equality Index of, HRC's Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, and how that really has raised the bar for trans inclusion in the workplace. And I'm grateful for that. So all these companies get 100 perfect scores, which means they have all the trans inclusive policies in place and everything else. But what I say is, you can't rest on your laurels. I've spoken to companies where I've said, so you had me in to speak at a Pride Month event. This is great. So what happens tomorrow if after I leave, you have an employee stand up and say, hey, I'm trans and I want to transition? Then what do you do? So this whole audience of primarily HR and diversity, equity, and inclusion types kind of gave me the deer in the headlights look. So it's like, well, then there's work to be done. And I talk a little bit about that in the book, where I talk about, how do we take the policy piece, which is really the easy part. That's just adding gender identity and gender expression to your EEO and your non-discrimination policy. That's the easy part. Well, what do you do to imbue that into the culture of the company? It's all about that. It's all about, how do you communicate, to how do people that do not have a trans or non-binary person in their life and might be interacting with one for the first time, perhaps in an interview session, feel comfortable with that, feel comfortable with understanding how to have the pronoun conversation, that sort of stuff. So I'd like to think, among a lot of other, I think, audiences that the book addresses, it clearly addresses that for, the corporate and HR community. It's like, how do we do this? And a lot of it has to do with, recognizing the culture within which you do your work, because, we don't do our work. I came out against a very conservative and brick and mortar culture. Um, so that kind of defined the playing field, so to speak, right? And I
Mhm.
think it's like that in every company. So it's having a more acute awareness of that will help you better understand where you can kind of push the envelope, the DEI envelope in your company, and um, and also, create space to have a have a have a for some perhaps a difficult conversation about how do we talk, how do we communicate. So often I hear with companies that I speak with, they're like, so I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to misgender you. So what do I do? And it's like, so you're leading some, depending on the individual company, you're leading people by the hand to some degree,
Mhm.
so that they can feel more comfortable again in meeting people, in particular trans people and
Mhm.
non-binary people, where they are when they show up to interview,
Mhm.
and that sort of thing. So we still have a lot of work to do. And it all begins and ends with education. Shane, I think you and I have had this conversation.
Yeah.
For me, it's a three-tier model. It's like, you know, I thought, honest to God, I thought, um, when I started doing this work, and I started my business, my LLC. Oh, I guess it was like 7 years ago now, something like that. I actually thought that soon thereafter I'd be done. I'd be out of work. I'd need to come up with a hobby. I'd have to learn how to fish or something like that. And a chick from Jersey learn how to fish? Oh my God, Shane, what could possibly go wrong, right? Oh my God. But but I was so wrong, because there are so many companies that exist today, and you know this, that didn't exist 10 years ago, that are just starting out on their diversity journeys, and they're going, yeah, help me out here. We
Mhm.
want to do the right thing, but and and we want to be more inclusive, and we want to walk the talk,
Mhm.
and talk the talk first, but we don't know how to do it. And and that's what I guess I didn't really account for in my thinking when I first started doing this. Yeah, a lot of the Fortune 100 are well on their way, on their diversity and inclusion journeys, but there's this whole crop of companies that, many smaller, much smaller, that
Mhm.
are trying to find their way. I applaud them for recognizing the fact that they need to do that, in the first place.